Today on Locked On Rockies, an unfortunate early season injury from one of the last people the Colorado Rockies can afford to lose. Brendan Rodgers dislocates his shoulder. We talk about the impact of that, plus one early season trend to keep our eyes on and potentially be worried about. To all that today on Locked On Rockies.
You are Locked On Rockies, your daily Colorado Rockies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Rock on Rockies fans, welcome into the Locked On Rockies podcast for today, the first day of March in the year 2023. I am your host of the Locked On Rockies podcast, Paul Holden, bringing you your daily Colorado Rockies talk right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where you can find your team each and every single day. And if your team is the Colorado Rockies, well, guess what? You are in the right spot. All you got to do to keep up to date with all things Colorado Rockies talk here on the Locked On Podcast Network is follow us here on your favorite streaming service or subscribe to the Locked On Rockies YouTube channel, where you can hear the show first and be part of the live chat, just like Nicholas Delvo and Soy Boy are here on the Locked On Rockies podcast. Loving the Avs representation, the Avalanche looking good yet again. Want to take this moment to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel Sportsbook is the official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more by visiting FanDuel.com/locked on. That's FanDuel.com/locked on to get started today. Today on the Locked On Rockies podcast, unfortunately, we've been kind of in good mojo. The Rockies once again off to a hot start in their spring training game against the Royals. They just cut the lead in half. It's 4-2 currently here for the Rockies, and the Rockies just lost their first spring training game. So the undefeated run in spring training is officially dead, but that's okay. We'll make do, I think. But we got to talk about some unfortunately concerning stuff with the Rockies. There's really two things that I've noticed so far that the Rockies need to be a little concerned about. And one of them, obviously, is health. And unfortunately, the Rockies were dealt a blow yesterday. Now, let me preference all of this conversation by saying it seems like no one is panicking. The immediate news of Brendan Rodgers didn't seem doom and gloom, but shoulder injury to a middle infielder, never a good thing, especially something like a dislocation. He's had the MRI. Rodgers ain't playing anytime soon. I can guarantee you ain't going to see Rodgers probably play for at least a week, I would say, at the absolute minimum, and that's even before knowing his diagnosis. But the Rockies simply cannot afford to lose Brendan Rodgers. Brendan Rodgers is way too important to the Rockies and way too valuable to lose. So we really have to keep our fingers crossed here. We really have to be hoping that this injury to Brendan Rodgers is just something minor and there's not too much damage, and that the process isn't going to get too much in the way of Rodgers and his ability to be ready for the season. If it takes him a bit to, if he needs the spring, if it's a little bit this, if it's a managed spring for him, that's fine. The Rockies need Brendan Rodgers. He's going to simply be way too valuable to this team, and someone that we know is going to have immediate impacts on the lineup, and someone that's going to do to be someone that's going to lead this team in a lot of ways. And Rodgers is someone that is going to also be, we did that whole podcast. We did that whole episode about Rodgers being kind of the guy, at least in my opinion. I think Rodgers will really be the guy for the Rockies this year, someone that is going to be great. So that injury could be catastrophic. Now, what will the Rockies do in the meantime? They have options here with second base. If, say, this unfortunate, we're just saying, Aaron on the, if it does take time for him to recover, the Rockies will be able to fill that position and will be able to use, some of their good depth utility players and give them a chance to develop more. We're going to, because of this Rodgers injury now in the spring, We're going to see a lot more Alan Trejo. We're going to see a lot more Castro. We're going to see a lot more of these utility guys that are vying for the bench positions and vying for a spot on the Rockies get a lot more reps at second base, and which I think was obvious going to come through the spring, but will be kind of nice because now we'll get a little bit more of a look at these guys, a silver lining. Of course, we're hoping for the best, and Rat King, I agree. If we were to be super concerned about the injury that happened to Brendan Rodgers yesterday, there would have been more concern or more alarm yesterday for the Rockies. There wasn't quite enough or quite a lot of hullabaloo with the with the injury, other than, of course, he has to have it put back in the place. That stuff could mean damage, and he had to have an MRI. So, of course, the warning signs are still there, but I think we would have there would have been a little bit more immediate concern, especially because I think even Bud Black addressed the injury and said that, it was one of those things that just happens where it popped out of place. They popped it back in there. We'll know more. So, before we get too focused on the worst, it does sound like, at least in my gut, I am no doctor, I am no expert, I am none of those things. I just feel like when an injury is bad, like when an injury occurs and it's bad, something at least like really, really bad, you kind of get that immediate notification. You kind of get that immediate feeling from the club that they know what happened. And Rodgers was able to leave under his own power. I think, obviously after getting assisted from the training staff and things of that nature. So that's it, that hopefully those signs are pointing to just, extended missed time for the spring, which could lead to a slower start for Rodgers. Absolutely. With something like this, but hopefully, it's just something minor. But circling around and going to where we were saying, lots more Alan Trejo. This will be good for those guys to have more reps and to get there. And now again, the Rockies do have Ryan McMahon, who if we get to the season and they need to figure something out at second base, they'll use their utility guys. But again, the Rockies can put Ryan McMahon at second base and put Montero at third. There you go. The depth concerns for filling those positions isn't too great because the Rockies have the pieces to put there. Alan Trejo, of course, going to be, I think, the Rockies' big utility man this year, especially in the infield. An infielder getting a day off where, and a prospect isn't filling in for that. Trejo is most likely going to be there. And Trejo is really someone that is trying to demonstrate and trying to have a strong spring to show that he is someone that the Rockies are going to be able to count on and go after. And I think, we'll see how that pays out for the spring. So the young guys and the utility guys, this is a time for them to, you're going to get some extra reps now because Rodgers is out. Let's see what you can do. Let's see what we have, and let's keep getting these guys, especially the ones that are really close to major league ready, some extra time. I'm curious how Nolan Jones factors in that, but I haven't heard a lot about Nolan Jones playing second base at all. I'm pretty sure he is just a corner infielder. I believe maybe could play some corner outfield as well. So Rodgers' injury, we were going to continue to monitor it because if it is long-term, it will be real bad news for the Rockies. But the depth is there, and they have people to fill in. Will that depth, the depth won't recreate the production of Brendan Rodgers, though. There is no one on the Rockies outside of, I think, a handful of players that will match or outperform Brendan Rodgers on the Colorado Rockies. So a long-term injury will be terrible news for the Rockies. But early signs, things that we kind of heard yesterday, we'll see if it's how bad the damage truly is. But just from the reaction yesterday and the reaction so far today, even with an MRI, doesn't seem like we should worry the worst. But who knows? We'll have to. We are still in total wait and see mode there, but a concern for sure. we'll keep an eye on Brendan Rodgers. We'll keep monitoring that. I want to move on to my other big concern, and it's not a big concern because there's a lot of positives on the other side, especially in the last 2 days. How now we're getting to, I think, like game 4 or 5, I think, for the Rockies. There was a trend that was worrisome at the beginning, in the first few games. Looks like the Rockies have corrected a little bit. Now, is that a good sign, or is that just maybe the Rockies going with some more of the veteran guys now that it's getting into the spring? We'll talk about that and a little bit more of our spring break analysis coming up here in segments 2 and 3. But before we do that, got to tell you about our friends at FanDuel. FanDuel is your number one sportsbook, folks. Your spot for all the action this NBA season, NHL season, and of course, Major League Baseball. And you can get a no sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's a no sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. All you got to do is download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scores and threes drained. Why don't you go bet on our boy, the Joker, or bet on the red hot Avalanche? Why not? The money lines, the overs, goals, all sorts of stuff available for you to bet on. You can even combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same game parlay. So don't miss the chance to get your no sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/locked on. That's FanDuel.com/locked on to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Want to thank you for making Locked On Rockies your first listen of the day. We're free and streaming on your favorite streaming service. All you got to do is search Locked On Rockies. You'll be taken to where you need to go. Or you can subscribe to Locked On Rockies on YouTube and see the show recorded live, just like Nicholas Delvo, Rat King, and more are here today. We are hanging out, talking Rockies. We went from our overreaction episode. Now we're going to I don't maybe overreact, but we're going to react to some of the concerns that we have about the Rockies early on this in spring. And there haven't been a ton of them really when you look at it. The Rockies have come out guns blazing when it comes to offense. And some of the pitching staff has been pretty darn good so far, especially some of the starters. The Rockies took a no-hitter deep into yesterday's game. They were, I believe, no-hitting the Royals up until the Royals tied the game there in the 5th. But the one thing that, especially in those first few games, that is another thing that I don't want to overreact yet, especially when you look at how many pitchers have played and how long those box scores are, when you look at how many players were in there and some of these names that you don't recognize. Too many walks from Rockies pitching in certain instances, because there's a lot of pitchers that have come through and have limited it, but Noah Davis can't be walking 3 batters in an inning, and there's a grain of salt there. But the amount of walks and free passes, we know how deadly those can be for the Rockies. Free bags, walks for the Rockies are a real good way to set yourself up for disaster. Rockies pitching in the game against the Brewers, even though the Rockies did outlast 12-6 in that one. 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9, 10 walks there from Rockies pitching in that game. That is more than a walk per inning. The Rockies cannot be averaging more than a walk per inning. That is just simply not the recipe for success. And again, we're taking all of this with a grain of salt because of these being young guys, this being the beginning of spring training. But when we're looking for worrisome things, when we're looking for the things we have to see the Rockies address and get better at over spring training, walking batters cannot be a thing the Rockies they can't excel at walking batters, is what the case I'm trying to make. The 10 walked batters in a normal game for the Rockies, loss. That is a loss. There is just no way you can afford to give up 10 free bags in a game. Not just absolutely, and especially not to some of the lineups that the Rockies would face. If you allow the Yankees to roll into town and you give them 10 free bags, Aaron Judge is going to destroy you. I mean, same thing with when you're playing the Dodgers, when you're playing the Padres. If you want to beat the Dodgers and you want to beat the Padres, if you want to make a statement against your division rivals, you cannot be even close to that in walks. The Rockies have to be great at limiting free bags. I will be more okay. Here's the deal. If you're missing your spots and you're walking batters, it's more frustrating than if you're getting lit up, at least for me. Sometimes you're just missing with your pitches. Sometimes you're just not getting the breaks and they get a good swing on it. Sometimes you're just getting dinked and dunked. We've seen that a lot with Rockies pitching, is sometimes the Rockies can get dinked and dunked all over the place in a super frustrating way. But I'm going to be more okay with if the other team's offense was just locked in and they were just swinging the bat well, than if the Rockies and they lose on a few run loss because the other team was swinging it well, than if it's, man, they had that inning where they walked 3 batters that inning and it was just one base knock to clear the bases, and that's 3 runs. You can't be doing any of that with the Rockies. It's just simply something that the Rockies have to avoid, and the Rockies have to get better at this year. Now, the encouraging trend for the Rockies does have them as they've gotten better when it comes to walks here. They after that game against the Brewers, they do take on the A's, where they have another back-to-back game of a lot of walks. In the game against the A's, the Rockies in total walked 6 batters, so obviously a little bit better. But in yesterday's game, the Rockies pitching staff only cuts that in half down to 3 walks. And let's check the box score here so far today to see how many walks they have given up. It's not readily available for me yet, so I haven't been able to listen to the full game. So that is thank you, Locked On Rays. I see that. I appreciate it. I do got my guy back there, Cargo. But yeah, that's the big worrisome trend from Rockies pitching that we've seen so far this spring. Walks will destroy and haunt the Colorado Rockies. We cannot allow them to, or the Rockies cannot allow themselves to be a team that gives up free bases. They're going to be in way too many shootouts. They're going to be in way too many games where it's going to come down to who's going to get, that one big base knock. And the Rockies got to be the team benefiting from that instead of giving other teams the opportunity to do so, because walks were such a key factor into why the Rockies struggled at home last year, and really just in general. They really did walk themselves into some tough situations. So those are my 2 big main concerns for the Rockies so far in spring training. We'll have a little bit more of our thoughts, and we'll take some questions from the live chat as well here coming up in segment number 3. Want to thank you for making Locked On Rockies your first listen of the day. We're free and streaming on your favorite streaming service. For your second listen of the day, you can check out Locked On Fantasy Baseball, or you can check out all of the podcasts surrounding Colorado sports. We have the Locked On Broncos, the Locked On Avalanche, Locked On Nuggets, and the Locked On Buffs podcast, all available for your Colorado sports needs. Lots of great coverage here on the Locked On Podcast Network. And if you want some great AL East talk, well, why don't you go check out Locked On Rays, because they're out here hanging out in the live chat, just like you all are here. Nicholas Delvo says, you're right. Silver lining of B-Rod getting hurt gives times to show their stuff. As unfortunate as it is, being a utility guy means you need to be ready to be that next man up at any point. And that includes right now in spring training. So this is going to be an opportunity for other players to show their stuff, to show what they're capable of, and step up when the Rockies really need them to. And it'll be really good to see. It's going to be good to see more Alan Trejo. I think a player it will be good to see him in the lineup as much as possible for the Rockies this spring will be Alan Trejo, because he seems to be like we talked about in the first segment, the next utility man number 1 I think, for the Colorado Rockies, at least at this point. So one thing I do want to talk about too, we've been talking a lot about pitching as well. It's good to see some of these Rockies players that were having issues with injuries in come back. I mean, Peter Lambert back on the bump. We saw Austin Gomber pitch yesterday as well. I know Austin Gomber played a lot of last season, but he's had some injuries for the Rockies as well. But the big one is Peter Lambert getting back on the bump for the Rockies and having a really strong showing as well. He's someone to really keep an eye on this spring for the Rockies, because he might be that fifth starter. It's going to be an interesting competition between Gomber and Lambert and who's really going to fill out that rotation for the Colorado Rockies. I think you're going to probably see most likely Lambert and Gomber in the rotation as we await the Senza recovery, which is still slated for May, as we're hearing and seeing from the reports of spring training that Senza is still on track to be returning for May. But the Peter Lambert, easily one of the pitchers to watch this spring training to see. He's been someone I think there was an article going around detailing the fact that it's been 3 years for injury issues with Lambert, and it's really, he feels healthy, he feels ready to go, and he feels it's really time to start his career and show off what he's capable of. So it's another interesting potential storyline for the Rockies. And what do the Rockies need from Peter Lambert? The Rockies need Peter Lambert to be a good fifth starter. That's what we need from Peter Lambert this season right now. Do we want more? Sure, obviously, of course. We want the best and the greatest for the Rockies. But for this season alone, Peter Lambert's goal should be to be the best fifth starter he can be. And I think he can reach that goal. I mean, that's a good first step forward, and a good way for the Rockies to have a little bit of confidence in Lambert coming back off of injury. The Rockies did have a lot of people missing last year from either the bullpen or their rotation at certain points in the season. So we'll see if the Rockies can stay healthy there at pitcher. But big injury concern for the Rockies so far this spring. Brendan Rodgers leaving the game yesterday with a dislocated shoulder. MRI today. We should know more soon, but I'd expect Brendan Rodgers to at least be missing some spring ball, but no announcement yet on the severity of the damage to Rodgers' shoulder, but we should know more hopefully in the next couple of days. But folks, that is going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Rockies. Thank you all so much for making us your first listen of the day. We are free and streaming on your favorite streaming service. All you got to do is search Locked On Rockies and you will be taken to where you need to go. You can get the show live and recorded first on the Locked On Rockies YouTube channel. That's where you can find us there. And you can find me at Paul Holden 33. You can also find the show on Twitter at LO Rockies. You can make your second listen of the day Locked On Fantasy Baseball, as well as the Locked On Broncos, Locked On Avalanche, Locked On Nuggets podcast, and the Locked On Buffs podcasts. So many great things for you to check out. Of course, want to shout out again, Locked On Rays, for tuning in today and hanging out with us here as well. And folks, until next time, this is Paul Holden saying so long from the Locked On Rockies podcast.